بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد عن أبي سعيد الخدري رضي الله تعالى عنه قال نهى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن اختناث الأسقية يعني أن تكسر أفواهها ويشرب منها متفق عليه. In our previous session, we started the chapter in which Imam Nawawi rahmatullahi alayh, he mentions that it is makruh tanzihi, it is a disliked action that an individual drinks directly from the mouth of a water skin or any other utensil in which he cannot see the drink. And last week we went through a few reasons. One reason is that when an individual he drinks from a utensil in which he cannot see the drink which is placed in it, then it's possible there's something in that drink, some dust in that drink, some litter in that drink which he cannot see, and when he drinks, then he also, with the drink that he is drinking, the water, the milk, the juice, he also takes in that litter. And one more reason the muhaddithin and the commentators of hadith mention, that Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the reason he stopped us from drinking like this is because when a person drinks directly from a water skin, or you can say in our time, if you have a bottle, a big bottle, or a jug, if you drink directly, then the force with which the water or the drink will go into your mouth, this could cause harm to your health. So this is also one reason why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam stopped us from drinking in this manner. The first hadith Imam Nawawi rahmatullahi alayhi, he brings in regards to this chapter is narrated on the authority of Abu Sa'id Khudri radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. He mentions that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbade us from ikhtinath al-asqiyah, meaning folding the water skin inside out. This is the literal translation. What does it mean? It means to drink directly from the mouth of the water skin. Now the question that arises over here is that why did Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam use the phrase ikhtinath al-asqiyah, folding the water skin inside out? For this, we need to travel back to the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or at least try to understand how they used to drink water in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like I mentioned last week, that in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, many people used to store water in these water skins, and they would keep the water stored. Whenever they need to drink water, they would drink it, and it would last them 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, depending on the size of the water skin. Now, because in the lands of the Arab, we already know, even in today's time, we see there's a lot of deserts. And even in that time, many of the Arabs, they used to live in those places. And it wasn't a place of much cleanliness like how we live, alhamdulillah, here today. In Canada, even in this country, we will find that the women folk, every week or every 2 weeks, they need to clean the house thoroughly. Even at least every day, they need to vacuum at the least. Why? Because dust comes from someone. It makes its way into the house. In the same manner, in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in those lands, because they used to live in deserts, what would happen was the sand, it would come onto the water skins. The dust, it would fly and come onto the top of the water skin. So what these individuals would do was, they wouldn't drink directly from the top of the water skin. Rather, they would flip the water skin inside out. And then it would be a border like, and then because the inside, there's no dust in it or on that part, they would drink after from there. So when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, Naha Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam an ikhtinath al-asqiyah. When Abu Sa'id Khudri radiyallahu ta'ala anhu mentions that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbade us from turning the water skin inside out, the reason they would do this was to drink directly from the mouth of the water skin. So when he forbade us from turning the water skin inside out, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam means that he forbade, that Abu Sa'id Khudri radiallahu ta'ala anhu means that he forbade us from drinking from the mouth of the water skin. Just to explain, just to explain in an easy manner, that for example, this is the water skin. So what they would do is, there would be dust on this part. What would they do? They would flip it inside out. So the inside part, there's no dust on it. There's no dust, there's no dirt on it. So they would flip it like this. And then they would drink from this part. Why? So that any dirt on it, it doesn't come into their mouth while they drink this water. So this is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is mentioning over here. That when Abu Sa'id Khudri radiallahu ta'ala anhu mentioned that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbade us from turning the water skin inside out, in reality he forbade us from drinking directly from the mouth of the water skin. Now before we move on, one thing I would like to mention to everyone seated here, or in fact wherever my voice is reaching at this moment, that one very important point we realize from this hadith is that just by knowing a bit of Arabic, just by looking at the translation of the Quran and hadith, we cannot understand the true meaning of the verses of the Quran and the prophetic statements of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If a person was to do the literal translation of this, then what would happen? He will not understand the hadith that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbade us from flipping the water skin inside out. This is the literal translation, but that's not what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam means over here. What Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam means is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is stopping us from drinking directly from the mouth of the water skin. So just by looking at the Arabic text, by knowing a bit of Arabic, or by looking at the translation of a verse of the Quran or a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we cannot always come to the correct conclusion. Many a times the individuals that translate, so many individuals that translate, they're literalists. So they do the literal translation. Now when you do the literal translation will never do justice to the meaning of the Quran, the verses of the Quran, or the prophetic statements of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is why, looking at literal translations, many individuals have objections, unfortunately, on the Quran and ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Many non-Muslims, they raise objections on the verses of the Quran, on the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why? Because they look at the literal translation and they are unable to understand and comprehend the meaning of the verse of the Quran or the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When we look into the lives of the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhu, despite being so close to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, having his companionship, despite that there were different darajat and different statuses in the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum when it came to understanding the prophetic statements and the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And not just the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, even the Ummahatul Mu'mineen and the pure wives of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Even sometimes Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would say a statement and it would take them months to figure out the true meaning of the statement of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The riwayah of Bukhari, once Azwaj Mutahharat, they asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, O Prophet of Allah, after your demise, after you pass away, which one of us will be the first one to come and meet you in Jannah? Meaning, after you pass away, which one of us will be the first one to leave this world? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam answered, and he said that the one of you with the longest hands. So the wives of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they right away started to measure their hands, and they came to this conclusion that Hazrat Sauda radiallahu ta'ala anha, she had the longest hand. So they all concluded and they all thought that Sauda radiallahu ta'ala anha will be the first wife of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that will leave this world after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's demise. She herself thought that. The other azwaj mutahharat and pure wives of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam also thought that. Now what happens? Some time goes by, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passes away. Some more time goes by, and the first wife of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to pass away was actually Hazrat Zainab radiallahu ta'ala anha. So right away the question arises that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually said, the one with the longest hands. And the one with the longest hands was Sauda radiallahu anha, but the first wife leaving this world is Zainab radiallahu ta'ala anha. So they didn't come to this conclusion that look, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, na'udhu billah, was incorrect. No, they understood that there was a fault in our understanding of this prophetic statement of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We didn't come to the correct conclusion. Not that the blessed words or the blessed statement of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was incorrect. No, look at their iman. They didn't conclude that he was incorrect. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was na'udhu billah incorrect. No, they concluded that our comprehension, our understanding of this prophetic statement of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was incorrect. So what did they do? Right away they understood that there's a deeper meaning to the statement of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Many a times there is a literal statement or a few words, but the meaning is not the literal meaning. It actually means something else. Let me give you an example. In English we call it an idiom. Let me give you an easy example. If someone makes a joke of someone or makes fun of someone, in English we say he's pulling his leg. If you go with the literal translation, what will it mean? That he's literally pulling his leg. But that's not what it means here. Literally, the words are he's pulling his leg. But the meaning is something totally different. What is it? That he's making fun of him. He's making a joke out of him. In the same manner, there's many ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that if we are to translate it literally, we'll not be able to understand its meaning. There's a deeper meaning to it. And this is where the fuqaha and the jurists come into play. Those who have a deeper understanding of the Quran and ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The likes of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, the greatest intellectual jurist. And this is not me saying, Imam Shafi'i rahmatullahi alayh, Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayh, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahmatullahi alayh. These were all great jurists of their time also. And Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi, also a great jurist. But he was the most intellectual and the greatest jurist. Imam Shafi'i rahmatullahi alayhi himself says, "An-nasu iyalun ala Abi Hanifata fil fiqh." That when it comes to fiqh and jurisprudence, the understanding of the Quran and ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the deeper understanding of the verses of the Quran and the deeper understanding of the prophetic statements of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, people are dependent upon the understanding of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala. Why? Because he would go deep into understanding the verses of the Quran and the prophetic statements of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Many people, even nowadays, they have this i'tiraz and they have this question on Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, that he leaves the literal text of the hadith and he does amal upon his own rai, upon his own intellect. Whereas this is not true. He leaves the literal text when there's another meaning. And when does he come to conclude that there's another meaning? When there are other verses of the Quran and other statements of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam or the Sahaba radiyallahu ta'ala anhum proving that. Let me give you an easy example. There's a famous mas'ala in jurisprudence. And what is that? The mas'ala of combining two salahs. It comes in the hadith, the Sahaba radiyallahu ta'ala anhum, they mention that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would travel, then he would combine the Dhuhr and the Asr salah, and he would combine the Maghrib and the Isha salah. So some jurists looked at the literal text of the hadith and they concluded that this means that you combine two salahs in one time. So some fuqaha and jurists concluded that this means that when you're traveling, you're allowed to pray the Asr Salah in the Dhuhr time and the Isha Salah in the Maghrib time. This is known as Jama taqdeem. Some jurists concluded that no, it means praying the Dhuhr Salah in the Asr time and the Maghrib Salah in the Isha time. This is known as Jama Ta'khir. And Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, he concluded that this means when it means that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam combined the two salahs. This means he combined them in its apparent form. What does this mean? It means that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took the Dhuhr Salah till its end time and prayed the Asr Salah in its beginning time. Let me give you an easy example that if you have Dhuhr Salah starting at 1 o'clock and it ends approximately 3 o'clock, Asr time begins at 3 o'clock, that means Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would delay the Dhuhr Salah until approximately 2:45. He would pray Salah at 2:45, Dhuhr Salah, then he would wait a few minutes, and as soon as Asr time would set in, he would offer the Asr Salah. So he combined the two Salah, but in the manner that he prayed the Dhuhr Salah in its own time and the Asr Salah also in its own time. And how did Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi come to this conclusion? He mentions that we have a verse of the Quran, Inna salata kanat ala al-mu'minina kitaban mawquta. Every salah is at its appointed time. It's been made farad and obligatory upon the mu'mineen at its appointed time. Dhuhr Salah, you have an appointed time for it. Asr Salah, you have an appointed time for it. Maghrib Salah, you have an appointed time for it. Before the time sets in, he mentions that the verse of the Quran is saying we cannot pray that Salah. And then there's a statement of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu ta'ala an. That Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu ta'ala anhu mentions, I did not see our beloved Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam pray any salah before its time or after its time apart from the days of Hajj. So looking at this verse of the Quran, looking at the statement of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala concluded that this means Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam would delay the Dhuhr Salah, pray Dhuhr Salah at its end time, and then pray the Asr Salah in its beginning time. Now, when we look at the other jurists, they also concluded, and because they did ijtihad, we cannot say that they are incorrect when it comes to their ijtihad, but when it comes to their ijtihad, when we look at this verse of the Quran, you cannot practice on this verse of the Quran if you take their meaning. If you look at the statement of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu ta'ala, if you take their meaning, you cannot practice upon the statement of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu ta'ala. And if you take the conclusion of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, you're practicing upon the hadith in which it's mentioned that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam combined both salah. You're also practicing upon the verse of the Quran, Inna salata kanat ala al-mu'minina kitaban mawquta, and you're also practicing upon the prophet, upon the statement of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, in which he mentioned that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam did not pray any salah outside of its time except in the days of Hajj. So this is what it means when you don't take the literal meaning all the time, especially when you have verses of the Quran saying otherwise, other prophetic statements of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying otherwise, other statements of Sahaba radiyallahu ta'ala anhum stating otherwise. Khair, I was mentioning that there comes a few statements in every language in which sometimes you have to move away from the literal text and there's a deeper meaning to that text. In the same manner over here, when Azwaj Mutahharat saw that Zainab radiyallahu ta'ala anha passed away first, they also understood that there is a deeper meaning to this prophetic statement of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the one with the longest hands will pass away. So right away they started to think, they started to contemplate, and they understood that the deeper meaning is that the one that spends the most in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one that is the most generous, that wife of mine will be the first to pass away. And when we see from all the Azwaj Mutahharat, we will conclude that Zainab radiallahu ta'ala anha was very generous, very generous. She was known as Ummul Masakeen, the mother of the poor. Why? Because she used to spend a lot on the Masakeen, on the poor. So when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said this to his azwaj mutahharat and his pure wives, that the one with the longest hands will pass away, right away they were unable to understand and come to the correct conclusion. It took them a very long time to realize that the meaning of this hadith is the one that is the most generous. My youngsters, my brothers, when the azwaj mutahharat, who are always with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who are more fluent in the Arabic language than you and I, when they were unable to understand and comprehend a prophetic statement of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it took them this long, then how can you and I today, who has no knowledge of the Quran and Hadith, or who is just looking at the translation of the Quran and Hadith, say that I have come to this correct conclusion? Especially when we are going against majority of the scholars. This is not possible. This is why it is very, very important that we take our knowledge and our ilm from authentic sources, from righteous and authentic ulama. And when we read books, then we make sure that they are written by authentic scholars. Khair, I was mentioning that there are idioms in every language. In this hadith also, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has used an idiom. The literal text will translate as flipping the water skin inside out, but Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that is not what he means over here. When Abu Sa'id Khudri radiallahu ta'ala anhu mentions that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbade us from turning the water skin inside out, the true meaning of the hadith is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbade us from drinking directly from the mouth of the water skin. So once again from this hadith, we realize, and Imam Nawawi rahmatullahi alayhi is proving to us that it is makruh tanzih. It's not haram, it's not makruh tahrimi, it's something disliked. And the reason it is disliked is for our own benefit. We are being asked to not drink in this manner for our own benefit, so that we don't intake any harmful substances. If there's dust, we don't intake that. If there's any litter, we don't intake that. When we drink directly, then the water that comes with force, it doesn't cause any harm to our health. This is why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has forbade us from drinking in this manner. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give each and every one of us the true understanding of these ahadith and prophetic statements of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant each and every one of us the true jazba and passion to act upon each and every hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and may He give each and every one of us the tawfiq and the ability to sit in the company of the righteous and the God-fearing ulama. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give each and every one of us the passion to practice upon each and every sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ameen. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa sallillahumma wa sallim ala sayyidina wa nabiyyina Maulānā Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.